Love is supposed to be a powerful force, a bond that brings people together, fuels passion, and builds trust. But when love is poisoned by betrayal, jealousy, and rage, it can turn deadly. History is filled with chilling cases of women who cross the line between devotion and destruction, committing unthinkable crimes in the name of passion, revenge, or greed. In this true crime compilation, we explore some of the most infamous cases where love turned into betrayal, and betrayal turned into murder. These are the stories of deadly women who deceived, manipulated, and killed. Jodi Arias, a lover's obsession. Jodi Arias and Travis Alexander had what seemed like a passionate, whirlwind romance. They met in 2006 at a work convention, and sparks immediately flew. But beneath the surface, their relationship was far from perfect. Travis was a devout Mormon who saw Jodi as more of a fling than a future wife. Jodi, however, had other ideas. Their relationship quickly turned toxic. Jodi became obsessed, showing up unannounced at Travis' house, hacking into his emails, and slashing his tires. Travis confided in friends that Jodi was dangerous and that he needed to stay away from her. On June 4, 2008, his worst fears came true. Travis was found brutally murdered in his Mesa, Arizona, home. He had been stabbed 27 times, his throat was slit from ear to ear, and he had been shot in the head. The crime scene was gruesome, and all signs pointed to Jodi. Initially, Jodi denied being involved, then changed her story multiple times, first claiming she wasn't there, then saying masked intruders killed Travis, and finally confessing that she killed him in self-defense. The jury didn't believe her lies. In 2013, Jodi Arias was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison. Her case remains one of the most infamous in modern true crime history, a story of love, obsession, and cold-blooded murder. Betty Broderick, a wife scorned. Betty Broderick was the perfect suburban wife until she wasn't. For years, Betty had devoted herself to supporting her husband, Dan Broderick, as he pursued a law degree and built a successful career. She raised their children, ran their household, and sacrificed her own ambitions so Dan could thrive. But when Dan reached the pinnacle of success, he decided he no longer needed Betty. In the mid-1980s, Dan had an affair with his much younger legal assistant, Linda Colcana. The affair quickly turned into a serious relationship, and Dan left Betty, eventually marrying Linda. Betty was devastated. She lost everything: the house, financial stability, and the man she had built her life around. But it wasn't just the betrayal that drove her over the edge. It was Dan's relentless manipulation. He used his legal expertise to outmaneuver Betty in court, took custody of their children, and cut off her financial support. Fueled by rage and a sense of injustice, Betty snapped. On November 5, 1989, she broke into Dan and Linda's home in San Diego and shot them both in their beds. During her trial, Betty showed no remorse. She insisted she was a victim, and that Dan had pushed her to the brink. The jury, however, saw things differently. She was convicted of second-degree murder and sentenced to 32 years to life in prison. Her case became one of the most high-profile crime stories of the 90s, sparking debates about emotional abuse, divorce, and whether Betty was a cold-blooded killer or a woman driven to insanity by betrayal. Nannie Doss, the Giggling Granny. Most serial killers have a certain coldness to them, but Nannie Doss? She was different. Known as the Giggling Granny, Nannie was a smiling, sweet-looking woman who hid a deadly secret: she was a black widow, killing her husbands one by one. Nannie's love life was a series of deadly relationships. She married 5 times, and each husband met an untimely end. Her weapon of choice? Arsenic. Nannie would lace her husband's food and drinks with poison, watching as they fell ill and eventually died. She collected insurance payouts and quickly moved on to the next man. Her killing spree lasted for decades. In addition to her husband's, she also poisoned other family members, including her own children and grandchildren. It wasn't until 1954 that her crimes were finally uncovered, when her sixth husband, Samuel Doss, mysteriously died. An autopsy revealed high levels of arsenic in his system. Under police questioning, Nannie confessed to her murders with a chilling smile on her face. She was sentenced to life in prison, where she continued to laugh about her crimes, earning her the eerie nickname that would haunt her forever, the Giggling Granny. Diane Downs, a mother's deadly deception. On May 19, 1983, a frantic woman pulled up to a hospital in Springfield, Oregon. Her 3 children were in the back seat, bleeding from gunshot wounds. The woman, Diane Downs, claimed that a mysterious stranger had tried to carjack her and shot her children in the process. But something about her story didn't add up. As doctors fought to save the children, one of them, her 9-year-old daughter, Christy, survived. And when she was finally able to speak, she told investigators the horrifying truth. It was her own mother who had shot them. Diane had been in love with a married man who didn't want children. So in her twisted mind, she saw a solution. If she got rid of her kids, he would be with her. Her plan failed. One of her children died, but 2 survived. Christy, who testified against her, and Danny, who was left paralyzed. Diane was convicted of murder and attempted murder, receiving a life sentence plus 50 years. She never showed remorse, continuing to spin lies and manipulate those around her. Her story was later turned into the book and movie Small Sacrifices, immortalizing her as one of the most chilling mothers in true crime history. Katherine Knight, the Butcher of Aberdeen. If there was ever a case that redefined the term crime of passion, it was the story of Katherine Knight. Born and raised in Australia, Katherine had a history of violent relationships. She was known for her explosive temper and disturbing behavior. She once held a knife to a former husband's throat on their wedding night. But her most infamous crime took place in 2000 when she brutally murdered her boyfriend John Price. After an argument, Katherine stabbed John 37 times with a butcher knife. But that was just the beginning. What she did next was straight out of a horror movie. She skinned John's body with surgical precision, hung his hide on a meat hook, and then cooked parts of his flesh. As if that weren't gruesome enough, she set the dinner table with plates of John's meat, intending to serve it to his children. When police arrived, they found Katherine unconscious from an apparent overdose. She had left a chilling note, filled with false accusations against John. Katherine became the first woman in Australia to receive a life sentence without the possibility of parole. Her crime remains one of the most horrifying in history, a true example of love, betrayal, and murder in its most extreme form. Belle Gunness, the Black Widow of LaPorte. Belle Gunness was the embodiment of a nightmare hidden behind a motherly smile. She was a Norwegian immigrant who settled in LaPorte, Indiana, in the early 1900s, building a new life as a farmer and devoted mother. But behind the charming facade, Belle was one of the most ruthless female serial killers in American history. Her crimes followed a chilling pattern. She would place personal ads in newspapers, luring wealthy men with promises of marriage and a prosperous future on her farm. Once they arrived, they were never seen again. Belle's first known victim was her husband, Mads Sorensen, who mysteriously died on the only day his 2 life insurance policies overlapped. With the payout, she bought a farm and continued her deadly scheme. One by one, Her suitors disappeared, murdered for their money, and buried on her property. She was as cold-blooded as they come. Reports suggest she may have even murdered her own children to collect insurance money. Her reign of terror ended in 1908 when her farmhouse went up in flames. Inside, authorities found the charred remains of several victims, including a headless body believed to be Belle herself. But was it really her? Many believe Belle faked her own death and vanished, escaping justice. To this day, her fate remains a mystery, but one thing is certain: she left behind a trail of deception, greed, and murder. These stories of deadly women remind us that love, when twisted by obsession, jealousy, and greed, can lead to unthinkable acts of violence. Each of these women had their own motives, whether it was revenge, financial gain, or pure malice, but they all shared one thing in common: they turned love into murder. Some of these cases have been the subject of books, documentaries, and even Hollywood adaptations, but the reality is far more chilling than fiction. These women didn't just break hearts, they destroyed lives. Love is powerful, but in the wrong hands, it can be deadly.